Today, we dive a bit deeper into the world of Diablo as we wander through the Tales of Sanctuary. Through these collections of short stories, we catch glimpses of various character concepts and ideas behind some of the elements within the world of Diablo. Presented as an anthology to the success of Diablo 2, these graphic novels help to expand the world behind Diablo. We begin with a story called Rage. Originally published in 2001 by Dark Horse Comics, authored by Dave Land, penciled by Francisco Ruiz, and colored by Rulo Trevino. The events of the story begin with what appears to be a young boy, running as quick as he can toward a fire-lit cave atop of a snowy mountain, yelling out to a druid. As he approaches the entrance of the cave, he seems unsure and calls out a little more carefully. He decides to venture just a bit deeper, his caution now almost at its peak, and he finds a large man sitting by a fire. He approaches him from the side and calls out a little more questioningly if this is indeed the druid that he seeks. Everything felt still for a moment. All that could be heard was the crackling of the fire. In that instant, the druid snapped back and grabbed the boy by the arm.
"Do you know who I am, boy?"
The boy, shocked by the turn of events, answered immediately. You're Asgar, the druid, son of Vayne, warrior of the noble clan of Skeld."
"Warrior of the Skeld clan? Not for many generations, cub. Why do you risk your life coming here?"
The druid released his arm and the boy took a few steps back. However, this did not stifle the boy's efforts, for again he answered just as quickly as he was asked. "Minions of Baal. A scout discovered them amassed on the northern ridge. We fear that they will attack soon. You must come to the village." The druid's face turned cold and placid. He slowly turned his gaze back to the fire and said,
"I can never go back there. I can never risk hurting anyone there ever again."
The boy stood for a moment and stepped closer to the druid, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What do you mean? Who did you hurt?" Silence filled the cave for a moment. The shadows danced and moved along the cave walls, seeking out any darkness still hiding in the recesses of the cave. It might have been the dimly lit surroundings, or perhaps something more. But in that instant, as the druid motioned back to the boy, the shadows behind him seemed to coalesce into something more. The image of a fearsome bear, monstrous in nature, only to then fade back into the swaying silhouettes of darkness. The druid then decided that the boy who risked his life to find him deserved at least some kind of answer.
"I hurt the one who looked up to me most,"
the druid said in an almost strained tone.
"When I was young, I trained in the ways of the warrior. My father trained me as his father had trained him. My younger brother, Gray, looked up to us both."
Asgar continued that his father would regularly note that his strength was growing at an incredible rate, perhaps even more than most his age, or maybe even fully grown men. To his younger brother, however, he was his idol and a champion in waiting. He would slay great beasts and continue to study deeply in the ways of the spirits.
"My training consisted of keeping the village safe,"
Asgar said,
"as well as spiritual studies, where I soon began to notice certain fabled abilities."
He explained that those of his clan viewed this as a blessing, a gift, they said, and meditation was required to master these gifts. Control and understanding was key. The druid continued,
"So, I put myself to the task, until one day, I became a monster. Never before had I known such rage, and it scared me. Instinctively, I ran to the one place of comfort that I knew, home. Unfortunately, my brother was there at the time."
Asgar paused for a moment, as if pained by something deeply. Images of that day flashed before him, the visceral rage and anger that swelled within him. Memories of Red and striking his brother filled his mind completely. He took a deep breath and continued,
"That day, I was truly possessed by the beast. As soon as I had realized what I had done, the transformation wore off.
He recalled his father finding him as he cradled his younger brother. Gray's body had streams of crimson running and flowing from his, pouring over his own, and reaching the ground beneath him.
Thinking I had killed my brother, I ran in shame. I hid in the forest, too frightened to face the consequences of my own actions.
Asgard paused for another brief moment. He remembered the gleaming lights of torches as the villagers searched for him, day and night. And he continued.
I could never go back to the village. I could never again risk letting loose the rage deep within me. The wilderness became my home. I was pleased to learn that my brother Gray was still alive. Yet I saw that I had ruined his life, as well as mine.
As Asgard continued his story, the boy noticed that his face grimaced for a moment, and then became stout and resolute as he continued.
I spent the rest of my days keeping evil out of these woods and away from the village.
Asgard took a deep breath and turned back to tend the fire. You tell a different story than the one I've heard. But that doesn't matter now, said the boy. Baal's minions approach. All of the warriors are away on an offensive. There are only a handful of guards left to defend the village. We will never survive the raid. The boy stood firm as he said his piece. If you want to protect the village, you must come back with me now. Hearing the boy's plea, Asgard clenched his fist and turned back to the boy as he gritted his teeth.
Let's go.
At the village, the battle was already raging. Guttural yells and clangs of steel could be heard for miles. The remnants of the village waged a losing battle. They weren't much more than farmers and stable hands, aside from the few guards that had remained. As the hordes of demons and abominations continued their onslaught, the denizens of the village fought tooth and nail, broom and shovel. It was all they had. Cornered as they were, they continued to fight as best they could. Just as one of the defensive lines had been broken, a group of villagers cornered. It seemed that this was going to end just as quickly as it had begun. As the pack of demons grew closer and some of the villagers backed up against the wall, options seemed to be running thin. Many clutched their farm tools and held their eyes closed, hoping for a swift death. But in that moment, a gush of crimson lines filled the air. Arms and limbs flew in various directions. Screams of pain and anguish filled the air as the ground was sprayed with blood. The pack of demons tried to scatter loose from something that was already deep within their midst. As the area in the center began to clear, the one who remained in the center was none other than Asgard himself. The demons tried to regroup, chittering and chattering as they did, seething at this new opponent they now faced. But Asgard did not give them the opportunity. He moved with a deft quickness that seemed to only be noted by the streams of crimson lines and sinew that remained in his wake while he continued his assault. Fueled by rage, Asgard, tapping into his true nature and leaving behind all vestiges of humanity, a new form roared to life. His hands became savage claws that cleaved enemies in two. His roar struck deep into the very heart of those around him. A macabre of limbs and blood filled the air around him as the whirling cycle of claws and fur ripped apart every demon in reach. They began to cower in fear and retreat as fast as they could, only to find razor-like claws separating head from limbs. In that moment, as Asgard stood in triumph, watching as the demons scurried away in defeat, a sharp chill drove itself through his chest. He whirled around and swiped at his adversary. Its head tumbled clear across the field, leaving behind trickles of blood as it rolled away. Its lifeless body slumped down moments later. Unfortunately, protruding through his chest was a large spike of sinew and bone. He reached up with his arm, breaking the point and removing the spike from his body. Warm liquid poured through the mats of his fur. His strength began to leave him, and he crumpled down to his knees. The ground in front of him slowly began to change colors as the snow began to quickly fill with a deep reddish hue. As the Druid began to change back into his human form, his mouth began to fill with the taste of iron as he tried to utter a single word.
Gray.
His brother was there. Guided by the villagers, he asked if Asgard could hear him. Overwhelmed with emotion, Gray made his way to his brother. Even though Gray could only see darkness, he could tell that time was short. Be easy, brother. I never held you responsible for what happened. I always looked up to you, even after the accident. It wasn't your fault. They tried to bring you back to us, but they could never find you. I knew you were there, watching over us. As he spoke, the clouds in the sky began to swirl and move quickly as the sun broke through. The outlines of something that appeared to be a beast began to form. You kept us from harm. Forever will you hold a place of honor. We will always look up to you. Brother.